You don't realize how loud $60,000 sounds until it's printed on HOA letterhead and slapped against your gate in the middle of a thunderstorm. The rain was coming down sideways that night, hard enough to turn my gravel drive into a ribbon of brown water, hard enough to make the pine trees hiss like they were whispering warnings. I was standing beside the old spillway with mud on my boots, my jacket soaked through, listening to the dam groan softly under the weight of 3 days of mountain rain. Not cracking. Not failing. Just doing what it had done for 40 years, holding back water that nobody downstream had ever thanked it for. Then headlights washed over the pasture fence. A white Lexus rolled up like it owned the road, tires crunching over wet stone, and Diane Caldwell stepped out under a black umbrella big enough for a parade. Behind her came 2 HOA board members in matching Silver Pines raincoats, both trying not to look at the water rushing through the overflow channel beside them. Diane didn't say hello. She didn't ask permission to be on my land. She just reached through the gate and zip-tied a plastic sleeve to the chain, the paper inside already curling from the damp air. Her perfume hit me even through the rain, sharp and expensive, fighting a losing battle against the smell of mud, wet leaves, and cold lake water. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, smiling like she had practiced it in a mirror. "This is your final notice. $60,000 for failure to maintain an unauthorized private dam endangering Silver Pines estates." I looked at the paper. Then I looked past her, down the valley, where the lights of her perfect little subdivision glowed warm and smug under the storm clouds. Big houses. Fresh sod. Decorative stone walls. Back patios built low and close to the old creek bed they pretended didn't exist. Diane followed my eyes and lifted her chin. "You have 10 days to pay or grant the HOA access and operational authority over this structure." Operational authority. That was the phrase she used, like my father's dam was some community pool filter she could vote herself into controlling. The spillway rumbled behind me, deep and steady, water sliding over concrete my dad had poured by hand in 1984. I could still remember him standing right there in a faded John Deere cap, tapping the side of his clipboard and telling me, "Caleb, water remembers where it used to go." Back then I thought he was just talking like old farmers do. That night, with Diane Caldwell smiling at me through the rain, I finally understood he had been giving me a warning. I unlatched the plastic sleeve, pulled out the fine, and let the rain speckle the ink. "You're saying this dam is mine alone?" I said. Diane's smile widened. "That's exactly what we're saying." I folded the paper once, slow and clean, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry. Not scared. Quiet. Because what Diane didn't know was that dam was the only reason her perfect neighborhood was still dry. And if she wanted me to stop being responsible for it, I was about to do exactly that. The next morning, the storm had moved east, leaving the whole valley washed clean and steaming under a pale Carolina sun. Mist lifted off the pond in slow white sheets, and the grass along the bank shone with beads of water. I walked the dam with a thermos of black coffee in one hand and Diane Caldwell's fine folded in my back pocket, feeling the soft give of wet clay under my boots. The old spillway was still humming. Not roaring. Not struggling. Just breathing the way it always did after heavy rain. My father used to call that sound the valley clearing its throat. He built that dam when I was 5 years old, back when this land was nothing but pasture, pine timber, and a narrow creek that snaked through red clay before disappearing into the lower meadow. His name was Robert Whitaker, and he had hands like oak roots, rough, scarred, and steady. He was not a rich man. He repaired tractors, baled hay for neighbors, and carried a yellow legal pad in his truck because he believed a man who owned land had a duty to understand every inch of it. In 1984, after 3 spring floods chewed 30 feet out of our lower field, Dad applied for a permit to build a small agricultural retention dam. Not a resort lake. Not a community amenity. A working structure. He met with county soil officers, a state water inspector, and an old surveyor named Frank Bell who smelled like pipe tobacco and kept pencils behind both ears. I still remember the day the concrete truck came rattling up our drive. The air smelled like diesel, wet cement, and cut pine. Dad let me press my hand into a leftover slab behind the shed, and for years my small palm print sat there beside his boot mark, proof that we had both been part of it somehow. When the pond filled that first winter, it looked like a piece of sky had fallen into our pasture. Deer came at dusk. Frogs started singing so loud in June that you could hear them through closed windows. But Dad never let me forget what it was really for. Every Saturday after rain, he took me out to check the spillway, clear branches from the outlet, and measure the waterline against a rusted steel post. He kept every reading in a little green notebook, neat as church handwriting. "Pretty water makes people stupid," he told me once, while scraping leaves out of the culvert with a shovel. "They see a lake and think it exists for them. But water is not decoration, Caleb. Water is memory." Back then, there were no stone walls downstream. No luxury mailboxes. No Silver Pines estates. Just the old creek bed cutting through the lower valley, exactly where the water had always gone before my father slowed it down. That was the part Diane never bothered to learn. She saw the pond and thought she saw leverage. My father saw the pond and understood responsibility. Silver Pines estates did not arrive all at once. It crept in like kudzu. First came the survey flags, little strips of orange plastic fluttering in the lower valley where my father used to cut hay. Then came the bulldozers, the smell of torn pine roots, the steady beep of machines backing over land that had been quiet for generations. I watched from my side of the fence with a coffee mug in my hand, telling myself it was not my business as long as they stayed on their property. That is the lie peaceful people tell themselves right before loud people start mistaking silence for permission. Within a year, the lower meadow had become a brochure. Silver Pines Estates, private luxury living with scenic lake views. I saw the sign from the county road one Thursday afternoon, all polished cedar and gold lettering, with a painted blue pond in the background that looked suspiciously like mine. Not the lower drainage ditch. Not some community feature they had paid for. My pond. My father's water. The one sitting behind my locked gate, fed by my creek, held by my dam, maintained with my hands every time a storm rolled through. The model homes went up fast. White siding, black shutters, 3-car garages, and back patios close enough to the old creek bed that any man with a shovel and a memory would have known better. They brought in sod by the truckload and rolled it over red clay like a green carpet hiding a bad secret. Decorative stone walls appeared where runoff used to spread during heavy rain. A walking trail curved along the low ground, with little solar lights stabbed into the soil every 20 feet. At night, those lights glowed like a runway for trouble. I met Diane Caldwell 2 weeks after the first family moved in. She came to my gate in a white Lexus, wearing cream-colored slacks that had never met honest mud. Her hair was silver blonde and perfect, the kind of perfect that looks less like style and more like control. She introduced herself as the president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, then immediately started talking like I was already under her authority. "We are so excited to have your lake as part of the neighborhood view corridor," she said, holding a leather folder against her chest. View corridor. That was the first time I heard the phrase, and I remember the way my jaw tightened. "It is not part of your neighborhood," I said. "It is on Whitaker land." Her smile did not move, but her eyes cooled. "Of course, technically. But the visual impact affects all of us now." That was Diane in one sentence. She could turn something she did not own into something she felt entitled to manage. She asked about access for photographers, seasonal water level coordination, and possible safety signage along my fence line. I told her no 3 different ways, each one calmer than the last. Behind her, the subdivision shimmered in the afternoon heat, all clean sidewalks and fresh paint, pretending it had not been built in the path of old water. Diane clicked her pen shut and looked past me toward the dam. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, sweet as syrup left too long in the sun, "private choices can create community consequences." I almost laughed, because she was right. She just had no idea whose choices would matter first. The fines started small, which somehow made them more insulting. The first envelope came on a Monday, tucked into my mailbox with the corners bent from humidity. $500 for failure to provide dam inspection records to the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I stood at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold, reading the sentence twice while the refrigerator hummed behind me. They were asking for records they had no legal right to request, from a man who did not live in their subdivision, for a structure they had just admitted was private. I put the letter in a folder and went outside to clear branches from the spillway. 2 weeks later, the second notice arrived. $2,000 for refusal to cooperate with community safety review. The paper smelled like fresh toner and arrogance. Diane had signed it in blue ink, her loops neat and theatrical, like she expected a judge to admire her handwriting. By the end of that month, the number had climbed to $15,000. By the end of summer, it was $60,000, and Silver Pines had started acting like my fence was a suggestion. They posted a sign near the gravel turnout that read Silver Pines Lake Access, with an arrow pointing straight toward my locked gate. I found it at sunrise, the metal still cool under my fingers, its 2 wooden stakes driven into soil my father had paid taxes on for 40 years. The lake was not even visible from that turnout unless you stood on the top rail of the fence and craned your neck like a trespasser. I pulled the sign out, laid it flat in the bed of my truck, and took photographs from every angle. That became my routine. I did not argue. I documented. When a private engineering company showed up in a gray pickup with clipboards and safety vests, I filmed them from my porch until they noticed and suddenly remembered they needed permission to enter. When an inspector from the county came by, I walked him to the property line, showed him the permit box mounted beside the gate, and let him read the old inspection tag still sealed in plastic. He looked uncomfortable, the way honest people look when they realize they have been sent into someone else's mess. "We received a complaint about an imminent hazard," he said. The creek murmured behind us, calm as a sleeping dog. I pointed at the spillway, the clear outlet, the grassed emergency overflow my father had seeded by hand. "Does that look imminent to you?" He did not answer right away. That told me enough. Diane worked the neighborhood like a campaign trail. She posted online about responsible infrastructure and family safety. She told residents their insurance rates could rise if my dam was not brought under association supervision. She stood at board meetings under warm lights and turned my father's work into a public threat. Every time she said safety, I heard control. Every time she said community, I heard money. Then one afternoon I came home to find 3 residents standing at my fence taking pictures of the pond with their phones. One of them, a man in golf shoes, told me Diane said the lake belonged to the view corridor, and that homeowners had a shared interest in its management. The air smelled like cut grass and hot gravel. I looked at those people, then at the water shining behind me, and realized Diane had done something worse than fine me. She had sold them a piece of my life and convinced them I was the one stealing it back. I tried the reasonable route first, because that is how my father raised me. You do not swing a hammer until you have checked the level. The next Tuesday, I drove to the county planning office with a banker's box on the passenger seat and the Silver Pines fines clipped together in date order. The building sat behind the courthouse, all beige brick and buzzing fluorescent lights, the kind of place where time moves like cold syrup. Inside, the air smelled like old paper, floor wax, and burned coffee from a pot nobody wanted to claim. I signed in, waited 45 minutes, and finally sat across from a young clerk named Emily who kept glancing at the stack of documents like it might bite her. I explained that Silver Pines was trying to find me through an association I did not belong to. I showed her my deed, the original dam permit, my tax map, and photographs of their lake access signs sitting on my property. She listened carefully, then typed my parcel number into the county system. Her face changed. Not much, just a small tightening around the mouth, but I caught it. "This file is under administrative review," she said. "By who?" I asked. She looked past me toward a closed office door with frosted glass. "Planning Board Liaison." That was when I first heard the name Tom Caldwell in an official room instead of neighborhood gossip. Diane's husband. Planning Board member. Local businessman. The man who had voted on drainage approvals for the same subdivision, now pretending my father's dam was the problem. The hum from the ceiling lights seemed to get louder. Emily lowered her voice and told me I could submit a written complaint, but response time could be 30 to 90 business days. 90 business days is a polite way of telling a man to drown in paperwork before anyone throws him a rope. I left the office with a stamped receipt, which was not help, but it was proof. Outside, heat shimmered over the parking lot, and the banker's box felt heavier in my hands than it had that morning. My first attorney was not much better. He had a corner office in Asheville, framed diplomas, and shoes polished so bright I could see the window blinds in them. He flipped through the fines, made a few sympathetic sounds, and told me fighting an organized homeowners association could cost more than paying them. "They do not need to be right," he said, tapping Diane's final notice with one clean fingernail. "They just need to make resistance expensive." That sentence followed me all the way home. It sat in the cab of my truck beside the smell of dust and sun-warmed vinyl. By the time I turned onto my gravel drive, I could see the pond flashing through the trees, calm and blue, as if it had no idea people were trying to turn it into a courtroom. I parked by the shed and sat there a minute with both hands on the wheel. Then I saw my father's old workbench through the open door. Rusted vise. Coffee can full of bolts. The green paint peeling off the drawer where he used to keep fence staples and survey tape. I had searched county records, hired a lawyer, answered letters, and tried to talk sense into people who made money from confusion. But I had not done the one thing Dad would have done first. I had not gone back to the beginning. The tin box was exactly where he left it, tucked under the bottom shelf behind a coil of rope, spotted with rust and dust. When I pulled it free, the lid gave a dry little squeal that sounded like an old secret waking up. The tin box smelled like dust, mouse paper, and the faint ghost of machine oil. I carried it to the workbench, wiped the lid with my sleeve, and opened it under the single bare bulb that had buzzed above my father's tools since I was a kid. Inside were the kind of documents nobody appreciates until the wrong person tries to rewrite your life. Folded survey maps. Permit copies. Soil conservation letters. Waterline sketches in my father's blocky handwriting. A faded photograph of him standing beside the unfinished spillway in muddy boots, one hand on his hip, squinting into the sun like he was arguing with the future. I spread everything across the bench, and the shed went quiet except for crickets outside and the soft tick of cooling metal from my truck. The first page that made my pulse slow down was dated June 14, 1984. Agricultural retention structure, private ownership, non-commercial use. The words sat there in black ink, plain as a fence post. Private. Agricultural. Retention. Not subdivision drainage. Not community flood control. Not a scenic asset for luxury homes built 30 years later. Then I found the county letter Dad had kept in a plastic sleeve. It stated that the structure could be modified or removed by the landowner if the original natural drainage path was restored and proper notice was filed. I read that sentence 3 times. Each time, the room seemed to get a little sharper. The old creek was not gone. It was sleeping under grass, stonework, and Diane Caldwell's expensive landscaping. I pulled out the watershed map, yellowed at the folds, and weighted the corners with a wrench and 2 coffee mugs. There it was, drawn in blue pencil, the original channel running from my pasture down through the lower valley. It curved exactly where Silver Pines had built its walking trail. It widened exactly behind Diane's own retaining wall. It passed under what their brochure called the Grand Commons Pavilion, a little timber structure with rocking chairs and a fake fireplace where residents drank coffee and talked about property values. My father had marked the channel with a note in the margin: seasonal overflow during heavy rain. Do not obstruct. The words hit harder than any fine. Do not obstruct. I opened my laptop and pulled up Silver Pines marketing photos. There was the same land, polished and repackaged. The old overflow path had been narrowed, filled, landscaped, and sold as usable community space. The stone walls were not protecting the neighborhood from my dam. They were blocking the neighborhood from the truth. Diane did not need me to repair anything. She needed me to keep holding water back for free. She needed my father's dam to keep acting as an unpaid insurance policy for houses that should have been built higher, farther, or not at all. That was why she wanted operational authority. That was why Tom Caldwell's name sat inside county files like a locked door. I leaned over the map and felt the old quiet settle in my chest again. Not anger. Not panic. Calculation. My father's voice came back so clearly I almost turned around. Water remembers where it used to go. I picked up Diane's final notice, laid it beside the 1984 removal clause, and the whole shape of the trap appeared in front of me. She had spent months proving the dam was mine alone. Now I was going to let her be right. I stopped talking to Diane after that. Not because I had nothing to say, but because every good plan needs silence around it. The next morning, I called a hydrologist named Aaron Bell, the grandson of the old surveyor who had helped my father lay out the original spillway. Aaron showed up in a mud-splattered county truck, wearing work boots and carrying a transit level older than some of the houses downstream. He walked the bank slowly, chewing the inside of his cheek while the pond flashed silver behind him. Good engineers do not rush water. They watch it. By noon, he had marked the old channel with blue flags, each one snapping in the breeze like a little warning Diane would never understand. The line ran from my lower pasture, under the fence, across what Silver Pines now called its nature trail, and straight toward the stone walls behind their model homes. Your father was right, Aaron said, folding the map against his knee. The land still wants to drain this way. I hired a licensed surveyor the same day. Then a drone operator. Then an environmental consultant who spent 4 hours taking soil notes and photographing every obstruction Silver Pines had placed in the natural flow path. I paid every invoice with money I had saved to replace the roof on my barn, and every time the number hurt, I reminded myself that expensive truth was still cheaper than permanent surrender. For 2 weeks, my kitchen table turned into a command center. Maps overlapped maps. Photographs sat in labeled stacks. Diane's letters went into clear sleeves, organized by date, amount, and lie. The $60,000 notice sat on top, clipped to her earlier statement calling the dam my sole private responsibility. I sent certified notices to the county planning office, the state water resources division, and every property owner whose lot touched the restored drainage path. No threats. No insults. Just facts, permits, maps, and the line from 1984 that said the landowner could remove the structure if natural drainage was restored. Diane responded on day 6 with an email that almost made me smile. Mr. Whitaker, it read, perhaps now you understand the cost of ignoring community responsibility. I printed it on heavy paper and added it to the folder marked admissions. Her arrogance had a sound to it now, the soft click of a hole being dug one sentence at a time. By the end of the month, I had a stamped acknowledgement from the state and a conditional approval from the county, provided removal was supervised and erosion controls were installed. Diane must have thought the activity on my land meant I was finally giving in. She drove by twice that week, slowing her Lexus at the gate, watching Aaron's flags ripple across the pasture. One afternoon she lowered her window and called out, "It is nice to see you taking this seriously, Caleb." The smell of hot asphalt drifted up from the Silver Pines road below. Somewhere down there, sprinklers hissed over lawns planted in the path of old water. I looked at Diane through the fence, and gave her the smallest nod I could manage. She thought paperwork was pressure. She did not know paperwork could also be a fuse. The opportunity came dressed up as a community meeting with folding chairs and bad coffee. Diane called it an emergency safety session, which meant she wanted an audience before she tried to make me look small. The Silver Pines clubhouse sat at the bottom of the valley, a timber and glass building with a stone fireplace, polished floors, and windows facing the pond they kept pretending was theirs. I could smell lemon cleaner, damp umbrellas, and the burnt edge of coffee sitting too long on a warmer. About 40 residents filled the room, whispering under soft recessed lights while a projector showed a slide titled Private Dam Risk Assessment. My name was printed underneath in red. That was a nice touch. Diane stood at the front in a navy blazer, one hand resting on the podium like she was taking an oath. Tom Caldwell sat in the back row with his arms crossed, trying to look uninvolved and failing at it. I took a seat near the aisle with a folder in my lap and listened. Diane talked for 20 minutes about responsibility, safety, and the burden one non-compliant landowner had placed on hardworking families. She showed pictures of my pond from angles that made it look wild and neglected, carefully cropping out the clean spillway, the inspection markers, and the erosion controls already installed along the restored channel. Every sentence was polished. Every pause was aimed at the residents. She wanted fear in the room, and she was good at pouring it. Then a man in the second row asked the question I had been waiting for. "If the dam is such a threat, why does the association not just take it over?" Diane sighed like a schoolteacher correcting a slow student. "Because, unfortunately, the structure is not association property. It belongs solely to Mr. Whitaker, and he alone is responsible for any consequences related to it." I felt the folder grow still under my hands. There it was. Clean. Public. Perfect. I stood up before she could move on. The chair legs scraped the floor, loud enough to turn every head. "Mrs. Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice level, "could you repeat that for the minutes?" Her smile tightened. "Repeat what?" "That the dam is not association property, and that I alone am responsible for decisions involving it." A few people shifted in their seats. The projector fan hummed in the silence. Diane looked at Tom, then back at me. Pride is a funny thing. It makes smart people reach for the shovel even after they hear the ground cracking. "Yes," she said slowly. "That is correct. It is your private dam, your private liability, and your private failure to maintain it properly." I nodded once. "Thank you." That was all I said. No speech. No reveal. No dramatic stack of documents slammed onto a table. Just thank you. Diane blinked, clearly disappointed I had not given her the argument she wanted. She moved on to a vote authorizing legal action, and the board passed it with all the confidence of people stepping onto thin ice because someone painted it white. I left before the meeting ended. Outside, the air had turned cool and metallic, the way it does before weather changes. Downhill, the decorative lights along the Silver Pines trail glowed in a neat little curve, tracing the old creek bed like they were outlining their own mistake. I opened the truck door, placed the folder on the seat, and looked back at the clubhouse windows. Inside, Diane was still talking. Her hands moved through the warm light, shaping the room, shaping the story, convincing everyone she had cornered me. She did not know the county had already scheduled final inspection for the removal work. She did not know Aaron had marked the breach sequence that morning. She did not know her words had just cut the last rope tying Silver Pines to my father's dam. As I drove up the gravel road toward home, The first drops of rain tapped the windshield, soft as fingertips on glass. The removal began on a gray Thursday morning with county trucks parked along my fence, and silt barriers stretched across the pasture like long black ribbons. No sirens. No shouting. No dramatic showdown. Just machines idling in the mist, men in hard hats checking clipboards, and Aaron Bell standing beside the old spillway with his boots sunk half an inch into the wet clay. The air smelled like diesel, damp grass, and the cold mineral scent that rises from earth when it knows it is about to be opened. I stood near the workbench shed with my father's green notebook in my coat pocket, feeling its square edge press against my ribs. The county inspector walked the site first, taking pictures of the erosion controls, the blue flags marking the old creek channel, and the temporary sediment basin Aaron had designed to slow the release. Everything was measured. Everything was witnessed. That mattered. When you are undoing 40 years of responsibility, you do it clean. The excavator operator eased the bucket into the north shoulder of the dam at 8:17 in the morning. The first scoop came away with a wet sucking sound, clay peeling back from clay, roots dangling like old wires. Water did not explode out. That is not how real water works when professionals are watching and the plan is sound. It seeped first, thin and brown, then gathered itself into a narrow runnel that curled around the fresh cut and slipped toward the flagged channel below. Aaron raised one hand. The operator paused. The inspector nodded. The valley held its breath. I heard my father's voice in my head, calm as ever. Let the land tell you what it needs. By noon, the pond had dropped 3 feet. Mudflats appeared along the edges where frogs scattered through reeds and herons stalked the shallows like they had been waiting for this appointment. The old creek channel woke up slowly. Water found the low groove beneath the grass, touched the first blue flag, then the next, as if reading directions written long before any of us were born. Across the fence, a few Silver Pines residents gathered on the walking trail, phones raised, faces confused. Diane arrived just after lunch. The white Lexus stopped hard beside the turnout, and she stepped out wearing rain boots so clean they looked borrowed. "What are you doing?" she called through the gate. Her voice had lost the syrup. I walked over with the county approval packet in my hand and passed the copy through the bars. "Restoring natural drainage," I said. "As the private owner." She stared at the first page, then flipped to the stamped approval, then to the map showing the old channel. Her mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Behind her, water began sliding under the fence through the cleared swale, moving downhill with quiet determination. Not wild. Not angry. Just certain. Diane looked from the water to the trail, from the trail to the stone walls behind Silver Pines, and for the first time since I had met her, she understood the shape of the valley better than the shape of her own authority. I folded my hands over the top rail of the gate, and watched the old creek come home.